This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Before I jump into my guest today, a little announcement, a little Michael Covel PSA. For those of you that are interested in a greater trend following understanding, a greater move ahead, check out trendfollowing.com/ecourse. That's /ecourse. A nice little introduction into the trend following headspace with a special unannounced bonus if you make it to the end. Go take a look. I think you'll enjoy. Today I'm going to dive into, with my guest, a new book, Understanding How the Future Unfolds, Using Drive to Harness the Power of Today's Megatrends. The book's authors, Terence C. and Mark Esposito. Look, we all know predicting anything about tomorrow is damn near impossible. But preparing for an uncertain future, if you're not doing it, forget it, you're toast. Terence and Mark have developed an acronym, DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E, that examines 5 interrelated megatrends: demographic and social changes, resource scarcity, inequalities, volatility, complexity, and scale, and finally, enterprising dynamics. Terence and Mark see this as a GPS system for our new global economy. And again, they're not attempting to tell you they know what's going to happen tomorrow. But they are pointing out that if you have that proper foundation, you could be ready. I wonder why someone like me would be interested in a topic like this. You can't predict the future, but you can be ready with a plan. Sure sounds like trend following. So let's jump right in with Terence and dig into understanding how the future unfolds. So Terence, I have written a few books over the years about trends. And one of the things that I write about is you can't predict these things. It often becomes, at least in the markets, when you're trading the markets, it's all about finding the momentum. But on the flip side, I'm a guy who first put his website up in 1996 when there really wasn't any defined trend on putting a website up or commerce. And I thought to myself back in 1996, my gosh, why does everybody not have a website? Why is everyone not selling on the web? Well, years later, Facebook gave everybody an opportunity to have their first website, and then Amazon gives everybody the opportunity to sell. So I could not predict how that was going to unfold, but I had a gut level feel that, eventually selling and web presences would be huge. But back to my books, I can't really predict the trend. You just got to kind of ride the momentum. If I kind of combine those two thoughts, it sounds a lot like where you guys go. And I want to let you comment on what I just said, but then also kind of lay out your premise on megatrends.
First, I fully agree with you. I wish I would actually have a crystal ball because life would be a lot easier. Basically, I would not need to work anymore, right? But the fact is that we don't. Having said that, even though it is incredibly difficult to detect where things could be going, I still think, like you were saying, previously we relied a lot on gut feeling. Things could be going that way. That's always the case. I think if you think about it, right, way back then, the most, one of the most accurate prediction of what's going to happen in the future was basically the rise of Asia. Way back then, I doubted many people actually see where, China would be where it is today. But way back then, people were all raving about, the coming age of Asia. And, Asia did actually pick up.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, now I'm in New York, right? I traveled from JFK to NYC yesterday on the public transport. I wish I was actually in Asia, let me put it that way. But way back then, right, It was geographical. It's almost like you can see that wealth would continue to spread like to different parts of the world. Other than geographical expansion, it was really, really difficult to really actually figure out where things are going way back then. We were to fast forward to today, I think today is a bit easier to actually think about where things are going for two reasons. One is that because in different parts of the world, things are actually unifying in a sense that they're all developing in the same direction. I think that's one. And two, I think one of the reasons why is getting easier to figure out where things are going is because the underlying fundamental problems, basically we are all suffering from the same problems. This hence the reason why when we look at drive, there are two things that we believe that it will continue to haunt us, and therefore in the future it will continue to be relevant. One was that it's resources. We know that for sure resources are only getting less and less, getting more rare and rare, especially not necessarily in oil and gas, as we argue in our book, but when it comes to food and water, for instance, right? Or at least quality food and clean water. And the second thing, of course, is inequality. You know that inequality is going to haunt us for years to come. If anything, we are going to see the relevance of the importance of focusing on inequality.
As a quick observation, what you just said should be so painfully obvious, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but when Jeff Bezos is worth $150 billion, that should cause everybody with a pulse to just pause for a second and go, whoa, that's a lot greater chasm than we've ever seen.
Correct. And that gap is only getting bigger and bigger. One of the saddest observations we have made is that such gap is actually widening everywhere, regardless of whether you're talking about the US. For sure, the US is happening in the US. In the UK, happening. In Europe, it's happening. In Asia, in China, for instance, is happening. It's happening everywhere. And it's not just because of government policy. I mean, we can all blame the government or the social illness. But, the fact is that the way technologies is actually moving along, and, now with the rise of intelligent automations, I think it is only going to continue. And there is not much nothing much we can government policy can do. I mean, it can only mitigate it, but I don't think it will ever be able to solve the problem.
Let me take you back to a comment you made earlier, which was the comment about Asia, how many people talked about Asia, but they didn't really see the growth. Now that I've had a chance to spend 5 years in Asia, I think it's painfully obvious that anybody that was there on the ground in China 15 or 20, 25 years ago could see it. If you weren't on the ground, you didn't see it. If you were just reading a paper in America, you didn't see it. But if you're on the ground and you're watching Shanghai be built in 10 years, you kind of get it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think this is the reason, one of the reasons why. I was actually saying to myself, I said, God, it is actually important for people to travel, to see different things. I haven't been to the US for, I can't even remember how long now. And it's nice to be able to see US again because it has changed, in many ways. What I'm trying to say here is this: it is absolutely important for people to be there and, at the developing front, in order to see the speed of development. I'll tell you, I'll give you another example. Before writing the book on megatrends, I could not care less about technologies. I can't even use Skype properly. So I don't know how to use technologies, and couldn't care less. I'm just not interested. And then when after we finished working on the book, we realized how important technology actually is. The fact is that, now, because through the research of the book, we realize it is absolutely vital to actually keep a pace with technological development. But only by doing it, basically, keep on learning about it, you can actually see the speed of development. This is hence the reason why Mark and I actually co-founded this company in AI. It's one thing about building up a company that can actually generate a separate income, but it is another thing that it allows us to really learn how quickly things are actually moving and developing. And this is exactly like, basically living in Saigon, for instance, right? You could actually see Saigon being changed, going through a dramatic change, from the previous regime to where it is today. So it's exactly the same thing, only that this time, in our case, it is not about standing in a location, seeing physical development, but rather seeing the business, the technological change itself and the business's attitude towards the technology and how they can actually possibly apply the new technologies into their economic activities.
Different than the technology point, but to add something on Saigon and an observation, I'm currently about 5 miles from Tyson's Corner, Virginia, in Fairfax County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in America. Tyson's Corner, big mall, big kind of a corporate development, defense contractors. I've basically seen in Saigon in less than 3 years, all of Tyson's Corner and then some built in less than 3 years. And it took Tyson's Corner maybe 30, 40 years to get built. I think sometimes too, without that travel, to see how once lagging economies or once lagging countries, to see how quickly they are catching up and perhaps ultimately passing by things that we've seen in America, it is just an absolute eye-opener.
I fully agree with you. And this is the reason why I think everyone should actually read and think. I'm not joking, because only by keep on running at the edge, being able to constantly keep yourself abreast, you can actually see how things are actually changing. I know, reading. This is one of the reasons why, in academia, I absolutely hated it. Even though I survive on academia, the problem with academia is that by the time the papers are published, not only first, we're talking about, papers never really, especially in business school setting, the papers, the articles, produced, they are never really relevant to what real life business is about. On the other hand, even though there are papers that are highly practical, and if they are not trashed by the so-called peer review, by the time they came out, it will be yesterday's or last year's news, because the peer review process takes so long. This is hence I always say to my students, I say, listen, if you really want to know stuff, forget about, the academic paper. By the time they all come out, they're all all news. You need to actually go see things. You need to actually go read things. You need to actually keep on thinking about things. I think this is absolutely vital. And this is basically the premise of our megatrends is, I say, listen.
So why don't you get into the premise of DRIVE and explain that acronym?
We made it very clear in the book by saying that we don't possess the crystal ball. We don't have the fantastic ability to look into the future. What we can at best do, and this is what we're trying to do with the book, it's basically what we call presentcasting. We're not forecasting. We're not looking into the future. What we're saying is look at what is happening around you. And hopefully, by understanding better what is happening around you, it would allow any reader, including me and Mark, to see how the future can actually possibly unfold and make sense of the current realities. And by understanding how the different dots are connected, you'll be able to reach out to connect new dots or the dots that are about to pop up, and then you can actually swiftly connect them. That's basically what we're trying to do.
DRIVE, this acronym you have, which represents 5 megatrends. I want to discuss the first one. We're going to discuss all 5, but the first one talking about demographics and social change. And just as we've been talking Asia, I'll throw one thing out there for the audience to consider, then I want you to kind of respond and dig in. Right now, and I'm sure most Americans are not aware of this, that if you take the population of Indonesia and the population of Vietnam, guess what? It's exactly equal to the American population. 2 countries that most Americans have not been to, 350 million people in aggregate for those 2 countries. And guess what? I can tell everyone listening, all of those people there, they want to have the same wealth and success as every American does. And guess what? They might be working a little bit harder. So let's break this apart a little bit and talk about some of the demographic changes in the current present that we can observe and start to kind of lay out how those are probably going to unfold. Because when you got 350 million people in 2 countries that are not the same wealth of America and they want to get rich, it's pretty easy to see what's going to happen in the future.
First, everyone is, especially with social media, especially with the internet, how everyone can see how the others are actually living. All you need to do is watch a couple of K-pop music video, and then you would realize that, hey, wait a minute, if Korea can do that, why can't we have the same lifestyle?
That connectedness that you're talking about right there might be the most important thing that I see in your work, because that connectedness is just driving everyone.
The good news for us, as researchers, is that everyone, at least in terms of how they want to live and what they can possibly do or consume, it's pretty much the same thing. For us, it's a bit easier these days to figure out what people are actually looking for. When it comes to standard of living, you know that everyone is competing, not necessarily competing, but striving at the very least to raise the standard of living. It is very natural because at the center of all economic activities, we're basically talking about people. If people want to actually do better, if they want to live better, they are going to actually put in more effort, and they are going to try to get to the next level with quite a bit of incentive.
Look, if you're in Southeast Asia and you travel to Singapore, you leave Singapore and you say to yourself, why can't we have that in our country? Why can't we be the next Singapore? Why can't our cities look like this? That's a huge motivator.
China, for instance, is the prime example. Why can't we be New York? Is it right or wrong to be New York? I don't know. But the fact is that if you want to be New York, you can be New York. This is what we're trying to say. Is like human desire. When it comes to pushing for things, it's clear that everyone is looking for the same thing. The problem here is that if everyone is looking for the same thing, you are going to share everyone's problem, or everyone's problem would pretty much be the same. As we said in the book, one of the things that I think many countries are actually suffering, many countries we're seeing at the very least, are basically the fact that people are getting older and older, the aging population. How do we deal with them? At the same time, at the bottom of the age pyramid is actually shrinking or basically disappearing. For instance, in Croatia, 25% of the young people, basically, they just disappeared. Where did they go? Abroad, because there are no jobs in the country.
It's just pure opportunity is somewhere else, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah, exactly. I go there quite often. Usually I would take Uber. In London, when you're taking an Uber, the people who will be driving the Uber will be someone who is in the 40s to the 60s. A lot of them are actually ethnic minorities or immigrants. Whereas in Croatia, you can actually see that most, if not all, the Uber drivers I came along, they're under 30s. What does it tell us?
But if I'm looking at something like your first letter of your acronym, DRIVE, the D, the demographics and social change, you want us all to pay attention to the demographics for our businesses, for our life, to be prepared. But you're not necessarily saying, hey, we can predict exactly what's going to happen. I'm not telling you take this particular action. It's more to be in tune with and understand that this is all happening.
It was actually our friend over lunch when we were talking about the book. He was saying that, guys, the closest thing you can have to a crystal ball that allows you to look into the future, it's basically look at the age pyramid. Unless there's a war, famine, or like a major epidemic. Otherwise, you know exactly when we are going to see problems or issues, challenges that need to actually be overcome and solved. Because you know that in 10 years' time, most of the people in Japan would actually, the working people, or in Germany, most of the working people would actually be going on retirement. How are they going to actually support these retirees, the pension? How are they going to fund the pension? How are they going to fund the healthcare system? It's tricky.
It is tricky. And what's really also interesting, too, is that for the youth, no young person wakes up and says, at 25, I want my responsibility to be taking care of this huge population of the elderly set. There's also that little bit of a conflict there, too.
It's not actually a matter of want. It's whether you can. In so many places these days, the youth are actually put in a disadvantage. For instance, as we said in the book, how many of them can actually buy a property, get onto the property ladder now without the help of papa and mama? If you cannot actually sort yourself out, how can you actually be possibly even thinking about supporting the elderlies within your family? There's no chance. It's sad. It's scary.
I was just thinking something as we're talking about demographics. I just got to the States for the first time in over a year. I went to one of the top 10 largest malls, and I felt like, and this is not a slight, now I'm coming from a country where 50% of the population is under the age of 30. It feels like being on a college campus. I go to this mall outside Washington, D.C., and I felt like I was in a geriatric community. It couldn't be any more of a shift. The average American's not going to feel that because we're already the lobsters in the pot boiling. So you don't feel it. But when you come from outside it and you look at it, you're just like, oh my gosh, wow, this is so different. Same thing in Tokyo.
The fact is this, you can only be aware of these facts when you are actually aware of these facts. You can only observe these things, right? Like you're saying, the lobster in the boiling water, gradual development, you can't see it. But only if you actually are aware of the fact that there is a problem there, you can actually start to see these are the issues around us. For instance, airlines. In many of the old airlines, the people, the cabin crew, you can see that the average age group is actually going up and up and up and up and up. I'm not like a discriminating or like, I'm not against it. But what you can see is that the cabin crew is actually getting older. Now, the question here is, why are they not going to why are they not turning themselves into ground crews? That's why my question one. Because everyone knows that one cannot really work in the air like all the time for too long because of the aging process, because of the dryness in the air. It's not helpful. Why are they not turning themselves into the ground crew? And two, how come there are no younger generations picking up the slack if there's a slack is created in the first place?
In America, the number one reason is unions. And of course, I'm probably going to sound like I'm an Asian homer right now, but I mean, my gosh, I just flew to America on ANA, and ANA is a joy. I'd rather have all of my teeth pulled out with no Novocaine than fly. I'll have to beep.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the fact is this. You were talking about unions just now. I mean, unions plays a very critical role. If you think about it, unions, I can understand the protection of employee. I can understand the protection of a labor right. The problem is that unions are all a lot of the time, they are actually protecting the older people, the older generations. The younger generations, if they want to get a job, it's very, very difficult. They're locked out. They're locked out. You can't even enter the job market.
You're getting to something in terms of the inequalities. I brought up Jeff Bezos and the inequalities being one aspect of your DRIVE acronym, but the inequalities are not only just Jeff Bezos at $150 billion. The inequalities are something as simple as airline staff and the cabin crew. Whereas if I'm flying from Chicago to Hong Kong, there's a very good chance I'm going to have a 65-year-old lady with her hand shaking giving me coffee. Whereas if that was on a different airline from probably a different country, the cabin staff is probably going to be under the age of 30. There's that inequality right there. So the inequality is not only at the Jeff Bezos level, the inequality is at the level of a standard job too.
Yeah, that's why we actually say that the age inequality is an important issue that we need to solve. Younger people are getting more and more disenfranchised. So for instance, in Spain, we always say Spain happens to be the country where 48% of the age group between 16 and 24 would have actually picked up a bachelor degree. So 48%, that is basically the highest percentage among all European countries when it comes to percentage of graduates within the younger population. The problem is that where have they all gone to find a job? A lot of them, unfortunately, actually went to London. What do? They serve coffee. Now, there is nothing against serving coffee, right? The problem to me is this. The Spanish government puts a lot of money into education, and they're all basically all the money is going to train the workforce abroad. If anything, the Spanish kids should actually be staying home, doing innovative stuff. But no, because of for whatever reasons, the tight job market, the inflexible labor law, they all went somewhere to try their luck. When they go to London, for instance, instead of picking up a job that basically matches their education background, they ended up serving coffee. Personally, I don't count serving coffee as a barista as a career. That's the way how things are going.
It's a very odd thing where so many kids are getting so highly educated, but the one thing they seem to be missing is the one thing that seems to be in spades in Silicon Valley, which is the desire to be an entrepreneur. So we're training all these young people to be robots, so to speak, in jobs that may or may not be there in a future volatile world. But we're not giving them, and I guess to some degree, I don't know how we could ever expect government or standard issue universities to teach this, but we're not giving young people the understanding of risk taking. We're giving them this desire to everything will be taken care of. There's no volatility, right?
Tell me about it. Over the past 5 years, I am seeing more and more students, MBA level, they're not bachelor degrees, MBA levels. They cannot actually tolerate a assignment topic that is not volatile, but that is ambiguous.
Is it just pure fear? I mean, they've been told their whole life, you must go down this track, then it'll be all rosy. I mean,
I think there are two things that are actually happening here. One is that an ambiguous topic, it is hard to actually gauge. There is a chance that you would actually be failing in quotation mark, because this this professor, is he asking for something very specific, but I didn't get it, and therefore, or two, if the instruction is not clear, I don't know how to actually proceed and do it. I don't know how to approach it. That's the thing.
you're raising something interesting as a guy from Hong Kong. So I know this from my friends from Asia. So you have all this super growth going on in Asia, but many of the countries over there and the way kids are taught and brought up, it's to follow instruction and not get outside the box, not get outside the line, stay in your lane.
Absolutely. I think there are two factors at work here. One is that our education system is still, almost entirely reliant on examination. As we stated in the book, basically, the education as we see it right now basically was invented 150 years, 200 years ago and during the Victorian times. And the whole point of examinations was very simple. Basically, you train people to work in very specific functions so that they can become administrators. These days, what education should be about is basically developing the confidence of the younger generations, of the kids, so that they can actually be able to handle the uncertainty, the ambiguous, the ambiguity that is going to actually happen, that they are going to face in the future. Because at the rate how things are changing, at the rate how technology is pushing forward, how socially, we are all connected, there will be a lot of unknowns. I think the most critical skills one could actually have, and this is what we're trying to capture in the book that Mark and I are writing right now, is basically the fact that they need to be able to have the necessary confidence to deal with this, to face these things, to be able to live with uncertainty, to be able to become entrepreneurial.
What percentage of university life or what percentage of students do you think are coming out of college with any kind of entrepreneurial understanding at all?
The fact is that, at least in business schools, there are more and more people talking about startups, so they are becoming more and more entrepreneurial. But the problem, of course, is that, going back to what you're saying in Hong Kong, if you want to become an entrepreneur, good luck, because your parents will never allow you to do that. Entrepreneurs basically means that there is a good chance, very high chance, that you are not going to be able to survive economically.
There's a strong reason why, though. For example, many Asian parents coming from China down to Vietnam, across even to Singapore, there's a strong reason why parents are pushing their kids the education direction. It's because if you look at what was going on in these countries 50, 75 years ago, there was a lot of uncertainty. So what's interesting is the parents are now giving this foundation. And yes, you need to have the basics, but the parents, I think, are still stuck a little bit in the fear mindset versus the opportunity mindset.
I think so too. If you're parents growing up in uncertainty, what you really, really, really want your kids to be able to attain is basically certainty. Now, here's a question. What is the best way to ensure that you will get certainty in terms of economic survival to become a professional, right? Because these are high-paid jobs. These are stable jobs. What you want to do is to make sure that your children will become, lawyers, will become accountants, bankers, for instance, because these are good paid jobs, and chances are you'll be able to actually pay your mortgage. Unfortunately, parents are pushing a lot of the children that way. My greatest concern with this mindset is that you can actually see that with new technologies, technologies by themselves, they are actually pretty ineffective. What really makes new technologies really powerful is basically when businesses use it to come up with new business models. And what we're seeing is that more and more new businesses and more and more new business models are basically changing the world upside down, eliminating a lot of the jobs. For instance, what we started to see, right, from the 80s onward, as a result of the rise of the internet, was that white-collar jobs are disappearing at an alarming speed. In many ways, the blue-collar jobs, the actual physical manual jobs, they are not being replaced by robots, but the white-collar jobs, especially with AI, they are at the forefront of getting an impact. These are the jobs that are going to disappear. Do I want to bet my kids on, becoming a professional? I'm not so sure. Law firms, for instance, you can now use AI to do a lot of the work done by lawyers. Machines are not going to replace lawyers, but a lot of the entry level work, a lot of the standardized contracts can all be now done by machines. I think it is only a matter of time when machines will start to actually eat its way up the rank, the echelons of the organization.
You make some great points in the sense that it's the individual that has the understanding for dealing with kind of a chaotic, volatile world is the one that has kind of got it figured out. I remember a few years ago, I met a young guy, 22 years old. He had never been to America. And he tells me, I meet him and he's like, he was very excited, but kind of understated. And he said, yeah, I started this t-shirt business. And he had just sold $50,000 worth of t-shirts to Americans without ever stepping foot in America ever. That kid, forget what he was selling or whatever, the idea that this individual, never been to America, 22 years of age, selling that amount of product, which is obviously a huge amount of profit, in 1 month to Americans. And see, that's the mindset to get to that point to where you look at the TV and you see all the stars on TV and everybody wants to be like everybody that's on TV and all that kind of stuff. But guess what? To be there, you don't get there by being like everyone else. You've got to step outside the box.
That's precisely what we're saying. I'm not worried about this kid you were mentioning because I'm sure this kid will be able to survive economically down the way.
Even if he fails, he'll figure it out.
Exactly. Those kids that I'm actually worried about are basically the ones who actually do okay academically, but actually hoping to get a job. Those are the kids I'm actually worried. And then, on top of that, with student debt, assuming that you can pay off most of your student debt, you will basically start to pick up a mortgage. How do you service that? How do you actually grow up? That's what I'm trying to say. It's hard.
All the things we're talking about right now are a mega trend. Obviously, there's this mega trend where so many kids are at school, they're putting all this money in, they're getting degrees that are probably overall going to be useless. But at some point in time, too, if that's the mega trend, the math doesn't work. So at some point in time, there's an inflection point.
The question here is, Mike, when is it going to happen? I don't know. Maybe in 3 years, 5 years. I mean, I read a report that basically that says now these days, within 5 years of your bachelor degree, whatever you actually learned in those 3-4 years as undergraduate, the information, the content, they all become obsolete. 5 years after you graduate.
Well, I think the key as you map this out is okay, we can all observe these mega trends across demographics, talking about inequalities, resource scarcity. But the key is okay, if we can see these things, we can't really know their duration. We don't know when they're going to end. But if I happen to be right now a 25-year-old person in America with a massive student loan and I'm bouncing around from barista jobs to maybe working for the government, the trend is you should be worried that that's going to stop. There's going to be a lot of people that don't think about these issues and they're going to wake up one day and someone's going to say, uh-oh, it's all over. I think that's the point you're trying to get people to think about is not that we can predict these things with any definite certainty, but be observant to what the hell's going on.
I wish we can actually write a book and say, listen, guys, you can all basically try to actually figure out what is going to happen in the future. Ideally, the book will actually tell you what to actually buy right now in the stock market, and therefore you can actually retire at the tender age of 35, 45, because that stock is going to go up and up and up and up. No, that's not the case. That's not what we're after. What we're saying is that this is what it is right now around us. Be aware of it and start really to think about where things are going. Then after that, in retrospect, how are you going to improve your situation right now? That's what we're trying to say.
The critic might come at you and say, well, hold on, where's all the data to support this? But that's not really your point, is it? Your point is to get people thinking about possibilities and to get people thinking, not to just say, hold on, this particular metric means this is going to happen. It's bigger than that.
Correct. If you think about it, I think because of the way, our science work has always been based on Newtonian physics, basically you need to have a lot of data. Qualitative research is always inferior to quantitative analysis. The problem, of course, is that we've got two problems. One is that data, are they really actually telling us as much as we like to know? That's one. Two is that if there are certain things we cannot obtain the data and therefore we should ignore them, you are basically looking at only half the equation. You get very, very little out of the answer with half the equation. This is the reason why we say, forget about data for the moment. Just go and observe and think about how they can be actually piled together. I'll give you a very prominent example on the view of data. Lots of companies still believe that what is critical when it comes to setting up, building up the AI capabilities within an organization is to have a lot of data. Big data is critical. A lot of data is critical. As it turned out, these days, the way AI technology is working these days, you basically do not need a lot of data. The movement now is going on to something called the sparse data. Basically, what it's saying is this: with a little bit of data, you can already start to build up your AI capability. This actually opened up a lot of new possibilities as a result, because if you're a company that has not been actually collecting data, well, you know what? You don't need those data. You can still go on to AI. And then also, right, a lot of the data, look at GDP data. Now, even China realized that, wait a minute, we just can't simply just pursue blindly the GDP. It's not like there are lots of things that are not taken into account in the equation. The social damage, the environmental impact, none of these were actually taken into account. This is what we're trying to say. Listen, there's no data, being very honest and upfront about this, but this is still happening, regardless of whether there's data or not.
One thing that I'm sure some of the audience might be thinking is, great, Terence, Mike, you guys are having this wonderful conversation, perhaps about countries that I'm not familiar with or I am familiar with, or, maybe the American audience is like, well, great, Mike, I really don't care about Indonesia or Vietnam or China or whatever. Let me give a little quick story and I'll let you comment. Something that happened to me recently. I needed to get some new lenses and I happened to be in Saigon, some new glasses. And I went to the eye doctor, a nice lady. She gave me an hour-long checkup with all kinds of modern German equipment. It cost $10. And the progressive lenses cost about $200. And you just walk out and you say to yourself, okay, what does this mean for America? This is what I'm saying as an American. What does this mean for America? Well, it surely means something. I can't tell you what it exactly means, but when you have that kind of competence in a country where the typical American would not expect to see it at such a reduced price, the great arbitrage is on across the world, and we are all connected.
One of the things I've been observing, and Mark, I think is even more vocal than me, is this. He always asks, why is it in Asia is so much more dynamic over there? To me, I always ask myself, why is it that over there in Asia, things are always more efficient than the way things work in, say, Europe, including the UK? And I think one of the reasons is the momentum. Things have actually always been happening that way. When you go to an eye doctor, you basically go through the longest possible process. The equipment is always, it's fine. You don't need the latest equipment. The lab is always charging the same amount, in terms of putting the lenses together. Regulations are protecting them. The jobs are okay. There's no need to actually improve things. And very quickly, right, when there's no need to actually improve things, we start to realize that, inertia is a very, very potent force. And the moment we actually start to get into allow inertia to actually take over and just do things as we have always done, you are not going to look at any much improvement or dramatic improvement in the days to come. And this is what we've been seeing. I was going through a JFK yesterday, coming from JFK, get out of the terminal, take the SkyTrain to Howard Beach to take the metro. Why is it that I have to actually buy 2 tickets? I first have to actually pay the air train ticket and then push the suitcase through a barrier that is basically not designed for pushing the suitcase through. And then over the other side, I would need to buy another ticket for the metro, for the 7-day travel card. Of course, out of the 4 machines, only 2 of them would actually be able to sell those things. Why? I was asking myself, why is this something so simple? They're actually not being redesigned. Make everyone's life easier. If you want to encourage people to use the train rather than taking the yellow cab, why don't you actually try to actually make it easier?
You raise a great point, and I don't want to sound like too much of a homer since I've spent so many years in Asia now in the last 5 years. But I think one of the things that's a tough conversation for people, and this is also maybe ultimately a mega trend, and I don't want to generalize about Asian countries because each country has its own ethic, its own style, its own personality. But, there is absolutely a cultural element across Asia that I never experienced as an American growing up. And that cultural element, I'm not saying there's perfection in Asian countries, I'm not saying that, but there is a cultural element that you can see in modern life that the rest of the world should be emulating. There is something, and I can't put my finger on it exactly, and it can change a little from country to country, but there is something, this desire to get ahead, this desire to keep improving. I sometimes think a lot of it is related to Tokyo, that Tokyo set the mark down and the rest of Asia said, you know what? I really think it's amazing how efficient and organized Japan is, and we're going to try and model our thinking to some degree after Japan. And you can kind of see that. You go to Taiwan, Taiwan doesn't really feel like China. It feels like a Chinese-speaking Japan. Sometimes there's these weird triggers, and maybe Japan was a trigger. I don't know. I'm kind of riffing a little bit, but I think you see where I'm going there.
I think the trigger itself is less important to me. To me, the key here is what's the mindset? Why is that there is no improvement mindset? That is something I don't understand. I live in Europe. In many ways, I almost always feel like I got lost in a time machine because things don't actually improve. And every time when I go to Asia, you can actually see certain things actually make it like life is gone a bit easier, in a very specific way, like going to the airport, coming out of the airport. Why? I always ask myself the question.
Those little things that you see in Asia, they make you smile.
Yeah. Something so simple, how come we don't have it at home? Like that's as something as simple as that. And this is what we're trying to do. Forget about thinking about the future. If you want the improvements right now, just look at what's going to happen around you. And this is what we're trying to do with the Drive book. Granted, we're taking it at a higher level because what we're saying here is these are the social, the economic, the business activities that are happening around us. But if we were to use the example of going to Asia, the little things you were mentioning, like the little things that can actually help you. I'm sure it is not just the little things in Asia that we observe that can actually be imported into the West. I'm sure there are many other best practices, good stuff that we can actually be borrowing from the other countries and put it into our thinking when it comes to designing activities around us.
I think this conversation we've had today, this is really, I think, what your point is. Your point is to have a conversation and to talk about these things. Maybe today in our conversation, we put the emphasis in one area, but the point is the emphasis is in a lot of different areas. There's multiple mega trends as you map out underway. What's going on in the current? Make an observation. Be aware. Don't just have the horse blinders on and pretend what's going on in your little corner of the whatever is all you need to care about. No, it's all connected and you need to care about everything if you want to be a high-achieving individual. If you don't want to be a high-achieving individual, as you pointed out, well, I guess you actually didn't point this out, but I'll point it out. If you don't want to be a high-achieving individual, damn it, you can go serve coffee at Starbucks.
We're not even saying that there are only 5 trends that are actually, happening around us. There are so many trends happening. The key here is that if we just give you a load of things without having sorted them out, there's no way we can actually put a label on them. This is the reason why, we basically say, okay, let's try to categorize and pigeonhole in a very crude way what the trends are, and then we can actually put a label on it. Because by having a label, we can come up with the name Drive, and therefore it helps us as a mnemonic to actually memorize what are the key things that we should be actually be looking at. The Drive is based, therefore, is a starting point to a much more fizzy, a much more like holistic thinking. But what we're trying to do is these are the 5 possible directions that people could actually be using when it comes to commencing on the journey of thinking about how we can actually improve our lives, where things could be going, what are the things as individuals we should actually be taking into account now.
The book, Understanding How the Future Unfolds. Terence, thank you for taking some time today. Hey, is there a place we can send the audience to check you and your co-author out? Obviously, they can go buy the book at Amazon, but is there a website you would like to direct people to?
www.megatrends.biz. Or go and hook us up on LinkedIn. We understand the power of technologies, and we certainly understand the power of connections and network. Feel free to actually contact us, write to us, talk to us, compliments, complaints, comments, all welcome.
Terence, thank you for taking the time today.
Mike, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you so much.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.